just agreed to a settlement with 49 of the AG states. It's really important because it's for an amount that I think is very reasonable, $12.6 billion. It's 7% we're going to have to be paid now. It's funny because the law fees are almost bigger.
So I'm sorry, what is the number?
$12.6 billion.
That's for all. And this settles the litigation with all states?
No, it's still there's still Florida because there's an ongoing lawsuit. But this is the California case.
This is the California case that was in court not long ago. We talked to Rob Bonta, the AG, about it last week.
Yeah, there's been 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks of trial. I thought that the trial was not going well for Meta, but it looks like that the states are willing to settle. The states, it's a really important call because the states have unlimited firepower, and there was a $1.5 trillion number floating around. I don't think anyone really believes it's going to be more than $200 billion, but this is substantial. Now, Meta's been, people don't really care for Meta stock, and I understand that. It's been the worst performer of all these, but I would say that this is a much better deal than anyone thought. There's a possibility that it could be as high as 18. Now, there's also TikTok's involved. They haven't settled yet. YouTube hasn't settled yet. But the out-of-pocket exposure on a 10-year basis of $12.6 billion, it's a rounding. It's a rounding.
Yeah, although some of the AGs were saying that it wasn't so much about the damages as it was about the remedies. Do we know anything about that?
The remedies are well within. It could impact as much. It could impact maybe 1% of Meta because it has to do with how much time kids spend, and kids do not spend a long time on Meta. They do spend on Insta, Facebook. They do spend more on YouTube. They do spend more on TikTok. So it's probably going to be more impactful for those. The fact that the stock is only up 3% is fanciful because this is probably the biggest existential threat that they face. And I don't think anyone thought 12.6. So some people thought that it
still sounds like a lot of money, although in comparison to what they're spending on CapEx, certainly not even in a given year. And to your point, over a 10-year period. Reading from the filing here in the court, the proposed consent judgment, including the underlying settlement agreement, is made part of the consent judgment. They say is substantively fair and reasonable. Jim, they go on to say the relief provided is substantial, directly addresses the violations alleged by plaintiffs. They've entered the proposed consent judgment. They say it would fully resolve the state law and COPPA claims alleged by the plaintiffs.
Yes. Now, what's interesting to me is so people can put things in perspective. They have a $10 billion legal fee they have to pay now. They already reserved $3 billion for it. So the legal fee, if you do it on present value, is actually higher than what they're going to owe the states.
Wow, their lawyers are going to make $10 billion? Is that what you're telling me?
That's what I'm telling you.
So that's the game to be in.
That's Porsche money.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, but, I mean, look.
Before we go, we just got I want to read a passage from the statement that was released by AG Rob Bonta, Yale alumni, outlining some of the reforms as part of the settlement. Here we go. Today's settlement includes default daily time limits on social media and a block on overnight use that can only be lifted by a parent, enhanced parental supervision tools, robust age assurance measures to detect users under the age of 18 and children under 13 that are on the platform, and the appointment of an independent auditor to oversee compliance. That is a portion from Rob Bonta's statement.
Wednesday, 26 August, year of our Lord 2026, we're going to get in back of this Meta settlement. I think the reason the legal fees are $10 billion and the settlement looks like it's only, 12 to 15 billion is that they thought the lawyers, this is going to be much more egregious. At least the way we were looking at this is that Meta was kind of on the ropes. So we're going to break this down. Joe Allen's going to be with us in the second hour. We're going to break this down. At first glance, I'm not feeling it. I think this is a cave by at least some of the state AGs. I don't know if the parents this settles with the parents or not, but they had Zuckerberg. I think they had Zuckerberg on the ropes. This way, Zuckerberg was going to have a legal fee of $10 billion. Anyway, we'll get into that. Do I have Mike Davis up? Yes, Mike Davis joins us, the Viceroy. Mike, I know you and Rachel Bovard, you guys started with going against these giants. I realize this just came out. Any first cut thought? I've got you on here for a totally different reason, but this just broke. Any first thoughts? I don't understand why the state AGs are doing a settlement here. I mean, this was one of the suits that have been worked on for years that was going to be essentially an existential threat. As Jim Cramer said, an existential threat to Facebook and to Mark Zuckerberg. This seems like a very light settlement, sir.
Yeah, like you said, Rachel Bovard and I started the Internet Accountability Project many years ago as the first group on the right to take on the trillion-dollar big tech monopolists, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple on antitrust, uh, Section 230, data privacy, safety. What Meta has been doing to kids is unacceptable. They intentionally get these young kids hooked on Facebook, hooked on Instagram, and then intentionally feed them harmful content through the algorithms that is so destructive to kids. I don't know why you'd want to settle these things. I need to look at the settlements by the state AGs, but this was not the time. When you have a rat cornered, you shoot it. To be determined after I read the settlements, but I don't know why you would settle.
I just want to say something. You and Rachel Bovard. One of the reasons these are popping up is you and Rachel Bovard were brave enough years ago on the right to take this on and say, "Hey, we're just not going to let these oligarchs throw campaign donations to people and sign off on it." You guys really moved the needle. We've had Zuckerberg cornered a couple of times, and he keeps slipping away. This $12 billion, $16 billion, this is tip money for this guy. And you can tell the stock's not getting hammered. I think the stock is actually up because people think this is a good settlement. Anyway, I'll make sure you read it and we'll talk later. But just overall, the antitrust we've had these tech guys at the beginning of the Trump second term. We had them where we wanted them. They slipped away. Now this settlement with the attorney generals, we got to go through it, make sure we understand it. But when Jim Cramer's sitting there going, "Hey, this looks like a light settlement. It was this one was existential, and they look like they got away." So we'll find out more about it later. But
let me say this really fast, Steve. I want to just
go ahead. Sure.
Let me just quickly commend my friend, the friend of the show, FTC Chairman Andrew Ferguson. He really put his neck on the line to take Meta to trial early on in the administration. He is an all-star in Trump's administration. He's helping with the welfare fraud task force. He's as his night job. He runs the FTC as the chairman during the day. This guy's an all-star, so I want to commend him. He's a former colleague of mine on the Supreme Court, a former colleague of mine on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he's the antitrust all-star who has been holding these big tech platforms accountable, particularly Meta.
Unbelievable. Yeah, one of the great ones. Mike, let's pivot now. You had a called shot yesterday. You said, "Hey, don't be breaking out the champagne because they're going to run right back to court and get another left-wing judge to shut this down on the mail-in ballots." Can we anticipate that this is just going to be a grind on the mail-in ballots because they did it yesterday, and that in all likelihood we're not going to get what you and War Room believe needs to be done to stop the abuses of the mail-in ballots? Because I guess the regulations are going to come out this afternoon, I think, from the Postal Service. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, the same left-wing radical Obama judge in Boston, who just got her injunction lifted 6-3 by the Supreme Court, just issued another. She said that the Trump Justice Department, the Trump administration, has violated her order, and she thinks that they should be held in contempt. And so the Democrats are not going to go away on this, because the Democrats, as we talked about yesterday, Steve, their entire playbook, their entire business plan is to mass import illegal aliens, particularly Islamists and other third worlders who hate America. This red and green alliance, the communist Marxists teaming up with the Islamists to destroy America. They want to give them as much welfare as possible, turn a blind eye to their welfare fraud, to their other fraud, their Medicaid fraud, their crime, and make it very easy for these Islamists and other third worlders to vote in our elections. That Democrats oppose the Save America Act, which has the support of 80% of Americans, including a supermajority of Democrats, minorities, Black Americans, who Democrats pretend aren't smart enough to get a voter ID like everyone else. But we all know the real reason. Democrats have a new constituency, and it's not Americans. Their new constituency is non-citizens, particularly Islamist, third worlders, Marxists, communist people who hate America and have no intention of coming here to assimilate. It's not like our ancestors, our Mick ancestors, Steve, the Irish people, the Italian people, other immigrants who come here and there's a melting pot and they assimilate. These Islamists, these other third worlders are making it very clear they have no intention of assimilating. They have no intention of becoming one of us. They have every intention of conquering us, like the Islamists have done for the last 700 years. So it's amazing that Democrats are so craven for power, so craven for money, that they're willing to destroy our country. Maybe that's the added benefit for today's Democrats, today's Marxists, because they hate America. So they're going to team up with the Islamists and other third worlders to destroy us.
It's a natural evolution. Do you see practically anyway this restrictions coming from the post office on mail-in ballots? The mail-in ballots, I think, in Wisconsin, I think it is in a couple of weeks, is like second week, third week of September. Do you see any? Because they're just going to continue to go back to court. It'll go to appellate court, Supreme Court, but the Democrats understand that this is existential to them. Do you see any way out of this for us, for people who want to have free and fair elections?
It's time for the Trump Justice Department, the Trump DHS, the Postal Service to ignore this Judge Tawani or whatever her name is, this goofball, left-wing, radical Obama judge in Boston. She just got slapped down by the Supreme Court on her injunction, and then she's saying that the Trump administration is going to be in contempt after the Supreme Court just ruled. She's the one who is lawless. She's the one who is not following the law. Just ignore her. Move forward with your plan. And if there are real plaintiffs who have real injury, they have standing to sue. These governors, these 23 Democrat governors, the DC Democrat mayor, do not have standing to sue, as the Supreme Court just ruled in their emergency docket, because they're not injured parties. They don't have injury in fact. They don't have Article 3 standing, which is required to go into federal court under our U.S. Constitution. This is a lawless order by this lawless Obama judge. She's trying to run out the clock because she's a Democrat operative who wants to make it very easy for illegals to illegally vote in the midterm elections. Ignore her.
Mike Davis, where do we go to follow you on Article 3 and also the social media of the Viceroy?
Article3project.org, article number 3project.org. Donate, but only what you can afford. Follow us on social media. The War Room Posse superpower, as always, action, action, action. And thank you, Steve.
Mike, you've had pretty good calls on this so far. So now you're telling Todd and the crew over at Justice, she's a federal judge. Just ignore it. Go about your work. Let's go ahead and press forward. Put the regulations out from Postal Service today, and let's see how it plays out. I love it. The Viceroy. Thank you, Mike Davis, for joining us. Kick us off on a Wednesday. That's how serious it's going to get. This is, I don't know, maybe a national security emergency order. I think the predicate's being laid every day. The Save America Act's not going to be done. Okay, Dolly Parton is going to take us out in every segment. Dolly Parton died yesterday at 80 years old. An American icon. We did a special last night. I want to thank the team for doing that. Dolly Parton will take us out. Jeff Stein is going to bring us back. We're going to talk about the economic numbers, and we are going to talk about this shot across the bow to Scott Bessent from his former mentor. All next in the War Room.
So with patches on my breeches, holes in both my shoes, in my coat of many colors, well, I hurried off to school just to find the others laughing and making fun of me and my coat of many colors. Mama
American voters. Neil, let me ask you quickly about inflation for a moment. Data out this morning is showing it is still an issue, higher than the Federal Reserve would like it to be. If you look at where interest rates are, despite what Scott Bessent is trying to do, the market is saying, things don't look great.
Yeah, we really seem to be settled in around 3% inflation, well above the 2% the Fed targets. And keep in mind, that's 3% inflation over and above the inflation of the last 5 years. So, when people say they're unhappy with the cost of living, with affordability, that's what they're talking about, the cumulative inflation over the last 5 years. And there's just not the credibility right now that it's coming down to 2 like the Fed wants. Kevin Warsh is speaking on Friday in Jackson Hole. I'm heading there tomorrow. We'll see what he has to say about the direction of policy going forward, whether they're going to do something more aggressive to try and bring inflation back to their target.
Neil, once again, I agree with everything you said, but what we just saw in the CPE data, is the core data, it's up 3.7%. I would round that up a lot closer to 4 than to 3. This is twice what the Fed's target is. So this is not good data. The inflation is really there. And there's some who expected maybe it'd be even worse than that. But this is a genuine concern. And the consumer good prices are going up. We know that oil is going up. And we know that Putin's behind it all, but that's a whole nother story.
Okay, welcome back. The number, it shows it's a little sticky. Also, the GDP number, I think more concerning, the GDP number came out. I think it's 1.1%. Jeff Stein joins us from News of the United States, Notice. Jeff was at the Washington Post, just shifted over to Notice. Jeff, I want to get into the story you broke yesterday about Scott Bessent's mentor kind of put a shot across his bow on his theory of all tools in the toolbox to kind of work the national debt and to kind of keep the cost of that to the Treasury as low as possible. Stanley Druckenmiller didn't appreciate that. You broke the story that he wrote it with artificial intelligence, of which he admitted, and the Wall Street Journal printed it. But I want to go, just your sense, these numbers, they're not coming down. I mean, the 3.7%, and there is some good news in this, but it just shows you that the cumulative effect of Biden, now you're going to have this run rate kind of around 3%. I think the more disturbing thing is the GDP number at just over 1%, because Scott's theory of the case is we're going to grow our way out of here, and you had, 3 and 4% growth in the second half of last year. Your observations on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the general sluggishness and the high prices, it's setting up for, I think, a real sort of potential internal civil war in the Republican Party in a few months here about what happened and why. The president has been very clear that these tariffs are an attempt in part to sort of restructure the fundamental balance of the economy. And he said, if we have to endure some short-term pain on growth or on inflation, then that's kind of what we have to do to bring jobs and manufacturing back. But even if you believe that, if it leads to sort of huge losses for the Republican Party in November, there's going to be a lot of people, the enemies of Steve Bannon, if you will, who will come out and say, this is what we were telling you guys the whole time, that the tariffs and the industrial policy and all the stuff on rebuilding the American heartland, this stuff just can't work. And we need to go back to Bush, McCain, Reagan, et cetera, kind of economics. And to me, that's one of the sort of key political dimensions that you see sort of in the growth and inflation numbers, that it challenges the narrative. And there might be perfectly plausible defenses of why those are compatible with a sort of more aggressive industrial strategy. But I think it is a short-term, at a minimum, political problem for that faction of the party.
Jeff, let's add it in. There's no doubt there's going to be a civil war about the direction, and you're going to go back to the same neoliberal, neocon philosophies that kind of got us here, or are you going to try to have a massive, use these forcing functions for a massive reindustrialization of the country and to really get us back to becoming a manufacturing hegemon? A key element of that is the debt and the deficits. And tell us about this story yesterday, because if you add the inflation, if you add the growth, if you then add the debt and deficit part of it, you then have kind of what's going to be the debate inside the Republican Party for how we go forward. Talk about this story yesterday. You noticed something, it was kind of extraordinary, and I think Scott was caught a little bit by surprise that his mentor would put a shot across his bow on his theory of all tools in the toolbox I'm going to use to try to manage the cost of financing and refinancing this debt. Druckenmiller put it out. You were the only person that realized immediately that this was written by artificial intelligence. How did you know that? How does some, because nobody else picked it up?
If you are as internet brain poison pilled as I am, and you spend as much time on Twitter as I do, which is not something I'd recommend to any of your viewers, you get a sense of what is written by AI, and you can sort of see the recursive patterns of speech that AI likes to use. And there's a few telltale signs. I wasn't the only one, I'll say, to notice that the Druckenmiller op-ed had laced through it, really from the beginning to the end of the op-ed, the sort of language that AI likes to write in. And it's not just the use of em dashes, it's the sort of sentence construction that is replicated across different AI models and becomes sort of easy to spot once you see people using it enough. But I was the only reporter to say, hey, I have this guy's number. I'm going to call him and say, did you write this with AI? And I don't know if the Wall Street Journal asked, but if it was obvious to me, I'd be shocked if it wasn't obvious to them. And I think even more surprising in some ways than the fact that Druckenmiller used AI to write this was that the Wall Street Journal then came out and said yesterday, we're actually okay with this. We think that, it's his opinion. He may have gotten the language from AI, but he's standing behind it. And so what if he used the tool? It's like the way Druckenmiller put it to me is like, I use a calculator to do math problems. So why shouldn't I use an AI to do writing? And that set off a really big debate, which really had nothing to do in some ways with the bond market or Besant or the Treasury intervention, et cetera, but captured sort of this fundamental question of when is it going to be okay to use AI? And although there is kind of an interesting resonance with the macroeconomic debate, because I don't know if you've talked to Besant about this, but what some of the Trump people think is that the problems we're seeing in the bond market are really just a function or sort of a positive story, that growth is so strong and the demand for capital is so high in the American economy that even if we don't see it quite yet in the GDP numbers, the investment numbers are still so strong. And that's really draining capital markets of the liquidity they need to bring down bond yields. And so there's a way in which like this debate comes full circle.
What I was shocked that the Wall Street Journal would say that we're okay with it, particularly when they did notify people. If they notify people, I think it'd be a little different. Let's go to the heart of it, though. As I read this, the crux of the argument was you've got to let natural forces here because this is all about the deficits and you got to cut spending, either raise revenue or cut spending, but particularly cut spending. I mean, that was the heart of what he was saying, right? That's also Scott Bessent now with Russ Vought is going to do this fiscal consolidation. We're going to get this report to the president in a week or two, but this is not really the secretary. That's really a Capitol Hill issue, isn't it? I mean, was Druckenmiller's, did he really take aim at the right person with the central heart of what he was talking about?
I'm glad you brought up that report that's coming from Besant and Vought. For people who are not aware, they've said that they're going to identify, I think they said hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts. This would sort of fulfill what Druckenmiller was talking about if you cut government spending, then the yippies we've seen, or the yips as the president put it, in the bond market will sort of ease because then there will be less debt being issued by the federal government. I think, to put it mildly, there's some skepticism in Washington after everything that Elon Musk and the president promised last year in terms of federal spending cuts, that anything will materialize on the order of something that will be commensurate with affecting the bond market. Elon and the president were saying they were going to find trillions of dollars of cuts, and as far as we can tell, that never materialized. Now, Vought, I think, has a much better and more nuanced understanding of sort of federal appropriations law and how to find parts in the federal government to cut. But the experience of last year, I think, gives us a bit of skepticism that there's any reason to believe like that's imminent. Maybe they'll find things and identify things to do. I mean, the alternative, and this is, I've been trying to call sources and figure out what's actually happening, is, JD Vance has a anti-fraud task force, and it would be a massive controversy, but there is a world in which they go around and say, we are cutting off blue states from these payments, from these programs because of alleged fraud that we found in, SNAP or Medicaid or whatever. There is maybe a path there to getting substantial spending cuts. But as you're saying, otherwise, this is just going to go back to Congress, and there's no, just as well as I do, that there's no real appetite for major spending cuts on the level of what they're talking about, to affect the bond market that Druckenmiller was calling necessary. But, I haven't heard Bessent's response. I don't think he's talked publicly about that op-ed, but I think Druckenmiller's point here is what Treasury is doing may kind of help suppress yields in the short term, but in terms of dealing with the structural problem, they're just kicking the can down the road. And if you're Bessent, maybe you're whatever, we just have to get through November and then we'll deal with it later.
Yeah. Jeff, hang on for 1 second. I just want to hold you briefly through the break because I want to talk about this civil war about economic policy between the neoliberals, the McCain and really the Reagan kind of Thatcher school, Larry Kudlow, Steve Moore, that crowd, Arthur Laffer, and people that are more populist, nationalistic, because this is all going to be part of a piece. Jeff Stein is with us, and we got David Barton. He's going to join us about his efforts in Texas and throughout the nation. Short commercial break. Back in the war room in a moment.
Won't you bury me beneath a willow under the weeping willow tree?
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Jeff Stein had a piece yesterday. Talk to me. Give me a minute or two about this upcoming civil war you see. I just wanted to add the debt piece because this is central about having to cut federal spending and really have the stones to be able to do it. You had a piece yesterday. Steve Moore, one of our a guy that I like personally a lot, but totally disagree with his economic philosophy, said that if you don't embrace Reagan and Thatcher, you're not going to be a force or a candidate in the Republican Party going forward. You see a civil war brewing between the populist nationalist economics and the neoliberal neocon that we've had for decade after decade after decade, sir?
I mean, I think the core thing is that all these guys that used to run the party, who were hired by Romney and McCain and those guys, they have kind of been, they didn't quite go away, Some of them, adopted a Trump. Some of them became never Trump Republicans, but they're still kind of around. And they've been waiting for their chance for 10 years for Trump to exit and for them to have a return over the party that they once felt in control of. And Vance has made very clear in the last few weeks on his book tour and some campaign stops that he is not going to be on board, at least rhetorically, with going back to the way things were pre-Trump. Vance is going out and saying, I don't like, or he criticized Milton Friedman and Margaret Thatcher and the Wall Street Journal editorial board, and has been saying things about the dollar and trade and industrial policy that are even further away from the old Reaganite wing than Trump was. And so that crowd, that never Trump crowd, coupled with some Trumpers who were kind of gritting their teeth and bearing the tariffs and the sort of Trump economic stuff that was distinct from Reagan, are, I think, really gearing up, according to my reporting, to sort of have a showdown in 2028 to try to get their party back as they see it.
Jeff, where can we go to get your reporting now and social media, all your coordinates? You broke the big story yesterday about this shot from Stanley Druckenmiller being written in AI. Of course, the Wall Street Journal wouldn't take your call, but later said, hey, no big deal. So I guess they'll be flooded with AI op-eds now. Hope they identify them so people know if it's really a human writing it, even a historic hedge fund manager like Stan, or just another machine. Your coordinates, sir, where do people go?
jstein_notice on Twitter. And yeah, find me there. That's me.
Thank you, sir. Great reporting.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to spend a lot more time on this economic civil war. Okay. Christian nationalism. They're in full meltdown, hair on fire on MSNBC, CNN. A congressman from California, Huffman's got a book on the rise of Christian nationalism. David Barton is our guest. Let's play a cold open for David and see his observations in response.
Is Christian nationalism America's most dangerous political movement? That's the case Democratic Congressman Jared Huffman is making in his new book, No Profits, The Fight to Save Democracy from Christian Nationalism. Congressman Huffman writes, quote, "It's theocratic, authoritarian ringleaders once dismissed as fringe now wield mainstream power, and they're using it to dismantle secular democracy from within." Merriam-Webster defines Christian nationalism as a political ideology that seeks to incorporate Christian beliefs into government decisions and policies.
What did you see on January 6th? I saw a profusion of religious extremism that I hoped would be a wake-up call for the country. I hope they would see this movement for the threat that it is. And instead, I watched the country go back to sleep. And I watched many of my own colleagues miss the religious extremism that was so central to the insurrection. So this book is my attempt to sound the alarm and have a bit of a call to action.
After serving in Trump's first administration, Vogt spent the Biden years hatching plans for the unrestrained vengeance tour that would become Trump's second presidency. Much of his post-constitutional philosophy was laid out in Project 2025, the authoritarian policy roadmap he helped write for the Heritage Foundation. To correct the problem of America being too secular, Vogt vowed Christian nationalist priorities would be plugged right in to a second Trump term. We see it. You can see it at the Defense Department, in the policies that the Defense Secretary has laid out. You see it in the administration. You see it in the things that the president himself is saying. You can see it in the Education Department. I'm using air quotes because they've gutted it. This is happening right now.
Absolutely. Yes, you're referring to Russ Vogt, of course, one of the Christian nationalist power players, a true believer. But he's not alone. You've also just covered Pete Hegseth. I think you're probably thinking about Speaker Mike Johnson, too, because he is a power player in this space. And there are many others. I profile many of them, not just as political figures, but as Christian nationalist power players, because they are pressing this agenda forward far more aggressively than I think most people realize. Since the early 1990s, our country has been getting less religious and more diverse, and that is threatening to folks who feel like their country is being taken away from them. It's a perception of lost status, and it breeds an extremism and a level of desperation that is really part of the militancy that drives this movement.
How do you, when you're walking around in Congress, I think you said the Christian nationalist pastors are lurking like lobbyists on the Hill. Who's opening the doors and letting them in as they're lurking around and knocking on doors?
Oh, they're in. Yeah. I think they've got a pass to come right on in. I try to take readers behind the scenes to see what I see every day, because in this chapter you're referring to, I call it the shadow theocracy. You really get a sense for just how entrenched this movement is in the customs and the routines and the institutions of our supposedly secular government.
Yeah. David Barton from Wall Builders joins us. David, you're one of the most prominent historians in the country, and certainly on the right. I would say you're one of the intellectual architects of trying to get Christianity back into the public space. Of course, now people are saying that Christian nationalism is the most divisive, dangerous political force in the country. Your observations on this, sir?
You know, it's an interesting battle because they have created a new vocabulary with new terms, and they've defined those terms. And so even things like Christian nationalists, that's a term less than a decade old, and now it dominates their thinking as though they're upholding the Constitution. This is what George Washington intended from his inaugural address. So it's really interesting to see them redefine terms, which they always do. It's also interesting to see how little they know of the Constitution and how much of a direct attack this is on there, and even just his opening line about saving the democracy. Oh my goodness, please read Article 4, Section 4, which requires that the United States maintain a republican form of government. The Founding Fathers hated democracy. There were 7 different forms of government available when they chose what they chose, and they routinely, John Adams, Benjamin Rush, others said the form of government they hated most was democracy because they called it a mobocracy. It gives into feelings. They wanted rule by law. That's why they have a written constitution. A republican form of government is antithetical to democracy. And so I even react more to that than I do to things like Christian nationalism, which is a term that is so vague, it's like throwing Jell-O on the wall. You can make it any shape you want. But they just simply don't understand the First Amendment, the free exercise of religion, anything else. And that's where the danger is in such an anti-constitutional position that they couch in new terms with fear all over it.
David, one of the great powers of your writing and your research and pulling things together, we're going to get into your efforts to get the Ten Commandments in schools, but it seems like you were the first, or at least the first, that kind of broke through and made it accessible to people to go back to the original documents, to go back to the original life stories of the revolutionary generation and then the founders of the nation after that, and really talk about the deep Christian roots of these individuals. Because over time, it had kind of been, oh, they were really secular or they were deists. Talk to us about that, about your research and what it shows about the revolutionary generation and the founders of this nation.
Yeah, great question, Steve. We're very blessed in that we have 2 world-class museums in Fort Worth, Dallas area. We're considered to have the largest private collection of founding documents in America. Right now, we're the only museum in America that has a document on display from all 56 of the signers of the Declaration. Of course, Smithsonian and places in D.C. have it, but they don't like the founders, and that's a real issue. So what we did in reading the founders' writings was we were struck with just how often they relied on their faith. One of the things I think is very interesting is the study that was done by the University of Houston, where they went through some 15,000 founding writings in the time of creating our government and found that the single source that was cited most often by the founders was the Bible. 34% of their quotes came out of the Bible. You have John Adams saying, hey, we got Jeremiah 17:9 as the basis of separation of powers and checks and balances and so many other things that we just don't think of. And I had never thought of that. I went through a very secular education growing up. I had no idea of this. And until I started reading their original handwritten documents, I had no idea that they were guys of faith. I was taught they were atheists, agnostics, deists, and now I know that 29 of those who signed the Declaration had seminary degrees. Pretty impressive for a bunch of atheists to have seminary degrees. So that's what changed me, was going back to original documents and saying, hey, what I've been told, what we've been told really since the 60s is not accurate history.
What was it since you were kind of raised and trained or educated in a secular way? What it was caused you to go back and actually do all this core research to find out that the revolutionary generation and the founders were actually deeply Christian?
You know, the thing that got me, Steve, I came through college and high school and even elementary. I remember my sixth grade elementary school history teacher told me that George Washington had 26 illegitimate children, giving new meaning to the phrase Washington slept here. So I came through school not liking the founders much at all. I thought, boy, if that's Washington, I can do without that. And so this is what I had been taught. And what happened was later in life, as I was an educator, I was a school principal, I taught math and science. I actually came across 2 very old documents. They were original documents. I came across George Washington's 1796 farewell address. And as I read that, this guy who supposedly had 26 illegitimate children spends in his farewell address, he gives a dozen phenomenal warnings to America how to keep us on track. I think one of the most ironic is he said, do not ever let the federal government get into deficit spending. I mean, that was his warning way back 200 years ago. And so as I'm going through his warnings, the longest one he gave was on religion and morality. And he talked about how you cannot be a patriot if you try to separate religion and morality from politics. And he talked about how that religion and morality were the indispensable supports of our political prosperity. And I'm going, whoa, that's not what I was taught about you. What I was taught about you was you were a very loose, immoral guy with no religion and morality. And now I'm reading his original farewell address, and it's kind of shaking me up. And then I came across a Supreme Court case in 1844 where the U.S. Supreme Court said, nah, if you're going to be a government-operated school, you're going to teach the Bible. We're not going to have a government school that won't teach the Bible. I'm going, time out. There's no way. And Daniel Webster argued that case, and I read that case in the Supreme Court records. Those were the two things that shook me up and said, maybe what I've been taught about history was not accurate, because as I'm looking at the originals, they're so different from everything my education system taught me. And that's where we started collecting old documents and started collecting the what we have now. That's what turned me around, was seeing those original documents.
David, can you hang on? We're just going to hold you through this break. We got you for one more segment. We're talking about this, about the documents and your efforts to put the 10 Commandments into schools throughout this nation. David Barton from Wall Builders joins us. We're going to take a short commercial break. Dolly Parton all day is going to take us out. We'll be back in the War Room in just a moment.
I have all the riches my pockets would hold. I feel so wealthy with treasures untold. If teardrops were pennies and heartaches were gold. But teardrops aren't pennies and heartaches aren't gold.
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back, David Barton from Wall Builders. David, you've been on a roll on getting, on winning throughout the country court cases to try to get. It doesn't seem like a big. It doesn't seem like a big ass, but man, it's a firestorm fighting you. This is putting 10 Commandments in schools, correct?
It is, yeah. The court has done a wonderful thing in the last, and this goes back to 2022. The court reversed itself over the last 50 years and said, you know, we've had this thing called the limit test since 1971, and it says that the only way you can have something religious in public is if the primary purpose of that religious activity is secular, and that's oxymoronic. You don't have any religious activity whose primary secular. And so the Supreme Court in 2022 said that was a really bad test. It's not based on anything historical. And they came up with what they call the history and tradition test that said if something is inherently historical and traditional in America, we're going to assume that it's constitutional. If the Founding Fathers did it and we did it for generations, we're going to assume that's constitutional. And so suddenly what that did was that said, hey, you can go back to having nativity scenes in public. You can go back to 10 Commandments displays. You can go back to nativity scenes or whatever, because those were all things we had until that 1971 decision. So what's happened as a result of that, now we run a legislative network. We network about 1,000 state legislators. We monitor about 152,000 pieces of legislation a year, and they will call and say, hey, we need help with this. Here's something we want to do. Who are the experts we can connect with? And so they started calling and saying, hey, can we put the 10 Commandments back up in schools? That used to be in schools till 1980, and it's been there from the beginning. Can we do that? And so looked, we got with the Supreme Court attorneys who actually won those Supreme Court cases, and they helped write the legislation that now has been introduced in 26 states. 5 states have passed laws putting the 10 Commandments back up in classrooms. And by the way, because of the historical collection we have, we can show you the very first textbook in America had the 10 Commandments in it, 63 questions on the 10 Commandments for first graders. We can take you through the McGuffey readers who had the 10 Commandments, the Noah Webster books that he wrote as a founding father with the 10 Commandments. So we can show history and traditions on the side of displaying the 10 Commandments. And that's why at this point, all the federal courts that have looked at this issue have upheld the return of the 10 Commandments to schools, because the Supreme Court said, if it's historical and traditional, we're going to assume it's constitutional. So this is a growing movement, and it's driven by the legislators themselves. They're the ones that introduce this across the states. So it's a rapidly growing movement, which I think is really cool that it's organic from them.
What states have approved it already? When people look, are the southern states, Intermountain West states, have any states approved this already?
Yeah, what you have so far is you had Louisiana do it, and Texas did it. You've had Arkansas that did it. You have Tennessee that did it. You have Alabama that did it. Kentucky has gone back. Kentucky didn't pass a law because they were the state where it was taken down in 1980, and they said, well, since the court said we can do it, we're just putting it back up. So they didn't have to pass a law to do it. So there's really 6 states that have done it now, and there's a couple dozen more that are getting ready to do it in this next session. And it has been introduced, I'm going to say, primarily and what we would consider to be the more conservative states. Now, the irony for me is, these guys, like we started with, calling this Christian nationalism. I'm going to go time out. When I'm at the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., inside the Supreme Court, I've counted more than 53 depictions of the U.S. Of the Ten Commandments inside the U.S. Supreme Court. They've got it posted everywhere. I walk outside the Supreme Court, turn left, go to the Library of Congress. I walk in, there's an 8-foot statue of Moses holding the Ten Commandments. Then I go across the street to the House of Representatives. As you walk into the chamber, there's the Ten Commandments. I go further down the street to the National Archives. As I walk up to see the original Declaration of the Constitution embedded in the floor in front of me, Ten Commandments medallion. It's all over Washington, D.C. It's in government buildings, not church buildings, and they're calling this Christian nationalism. Come on, guys, give me a break. So I'm intrigued with the fact of how permeated our society had been with the Ten Commandments prior to the recent generation. And there is a growing desire among the populace, among legislators, among others, to get back to some of those standards.
David, where can people go to find out more information, to support your efforts, and just to find out more about it and what they can do in their own states? Where do they go?
They'll go to wallbuilders.com or profamily.com. Those are the two websites. Profamily.com is where a lot of the legislators go. And then wallbuilders.com is where we have the historical information. You can come see the museums, come visit North Dallas, West Fort Worth, two huge museums, fun for people to see.
Social media, where can people get your writings and your thinking? Also Wall Builders, or do you have social media that people should go to?
Social media, Wall Builders, all over all the social media platforms. So just follow Wall Builders.
David, you're doing the Lord's work. Thank you for taking time to join us on War Room today. Look forward to having you back.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate all you do, brother. Bless you.
Thank you, sir. Let's pile into there. Let's find out more about this. This is an effort that needs to happen. Okay, Dolly Parton's going to take us out. Kind of an ironic song about where she would like to be buried. Get ready for the second hour of the War Room. It's going to come in a moment. I want to thank Birch Gold for sponsoring our day. I think we're trying to get Philip Patrick up either this evening or tomorrow. Bannon, text Bannon, Bannon, 989898. Ultimate guide for investing in gold and precious metals in the age of Trump, and you get direct access to Philip Patrick and his team. Like I said, I think we're getting Philip and Natalie up tonight, or maybe Philip tomorrow. We're going to figure it all out. Joe Allen's going to be with us in the second hour. Michael Pack's got a new film about Abbey Gate, all of it. Dolly Parton will take us out. We're going to be back in just a moment.